What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever time it is, and welcome back to another video with your man, Measureholic. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another faction overview for the Divide into Paramount for Total War Rome 2. Today we're checking out our first nomadic faction for this series, which will be the Royal Scythians, also known as the Basiloi Scythia, however you want to pronounce that. I'll just be referring to them as the Royal Scythians or the Scythians. That's just how I've always pronounced it and said it. So anyway, moving forward though, as always, my faction overview videos always have a 3-part section to each video. So part 1 will be the campaign overview, where we check out the actual grand campaign strategic position of the faction, and I'll go over the economy, diplomacy, and some other things with that. Part 2 will cover the military. That's the navy and all of the land units for the faction, and I'll give you guys a brief kind of description as well on what to expect for the rest of your campaign. And then part 3 is where we'll talk about the verdict for the faction. Most importantly, in that verdict, we'll be talking about how difficult they are on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, so let's get on into it. So before we jump into the grand campaign overview, let's check out your buffs and debuffs that you receive. As you can see, you're part of the Scythia culture subgroup, which is basically referencing Scythians and Sarmatians, basically the northern nomads on the map. You share the Born in the Saddle perk with the other 2 Scythian tribes, or I should say basically nomadic, because they're not both just Scythian, they are Sarmatian. And this perk gives you minus 25% upkeep to all cavalry units. It is only cav, not infantry or anything else, but that is a really substantial perk. I think that's one of the more powerful ones we've seen. Generally speaking, the economy of quote-unquote barbarian factions is really quite rough in the early game, and since being nomadic, you basically are a barbarian, your economy is going to be in a very big struggle. So in my opinion, this is a super powerful perk, especially considering most of your units already have a fairly low upkeep, at least from what I've seen in my testing and my analysis, I guess you could say, of the military. So that's going to be super useful. You'll be able to have a lot of cavalry for not too much cost, which is basically the aim of the game for you, at least early on. Then you also share the Sea of Grass benefit or perk with the other 2 factions, which increases your morale on plains and grasslands. There are multiple different types of terrain on the grand campaign and in the battle map, and this will help you out when you're fighting on plains terrain or just on grasslands. So it's not amazing. I kind of wish it gave us a number on how much it would increase your morale, but either way, any kind of increase is always welcome. So it's not a bad perk, but it's definitely nothing to do backflips over. However, now let us get down into the Royal Scythian specific buffs and debuffs that they receive. So down here, they have the Steppe Slave Masters. They have increased slave resource production. That will be very helpful for you when you take over Thracia, where you'll be able to actually get the slave resource down there. And then you also have the Archery Masters perk, which gives you increased ammo from missile units, which is super helpful. And it will also be amplified by what has now been done with the supply units that you get in the campaign. You're always able to get supply units before, or basically a caravan unit that gave your army a little bit more extra supply, but now they actually apply in-game battlefield benefits to your army, in that they give you a 15% increase in ammunition for all of your units, or at least for your missile units. I'm not sure if it actually affects any other units. I'll have to double check that, but either way, increased ammo is excellent because you're going to be very archery focused, at least for the early game. Your debuff that you receive though is that you have a Hellenic wariness debuff, which gives you morale penalty against Greeks, which is actually quite bad because your first enemy should be fighting Greeks. It should be the Greek faction, the Bosporan Kingdom, down here to your south. And then as you continue marching south, you'll end up fighting quite a few Greeks in the big game. And in the late game even, you might even have some of the Greek juggernauts going up against you. So this will hurt you throughout your campaign. How much though, I can't really say, but it is a pretty substantial debuff. A lot of debuffs can usually be ignored or at least worked around, but this is just straight up, your units are going to have less morale when you're fighting Greeks. So it's a little rough, but it's not the end of the world. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to say here. Now let's jump into the part one section of this video. Keep in mind, I will have a comment posted down below of timestamps for you to go between the different sections of the video. But anyway, let's do this. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the part one section of this video where we're going to check out the grand campaign situation for the Royal Scythians. So as you can see, you are a one-hitter quitter faction. Like many factions in the grand campaign, you only start off with one settlement. You start off with one army right here in your capital, and you have only one agent actually up here all the way in the north. You have a spy. I'm not sure why he's up here. It's not too helpful. It would be nice if he was just down here by your settlement, but he's up there for whatever reason. So your army starts off with some very basic units. You have a skirmisher unit, then you have 2 horse archers, and then of course your noble cav general bodyguard unit. That is it. You start off with a fairly bare bones situation. The one upside is that you do have a walled settlement. So if you like, when you start marching your army out to go and conquer your enemies, you can always just leave a general here with about 4 or 5 archers and maybe 1 or 2 spear units, and they'll be able to hold off against most armies at least for the first probably 20, 30, 40 turns. After that, that's when you're going to start seeing more substantial armies coming against you. But in the early game, just a few units added on top of your garrison can basically hold off most attacking forces. Maybe even get 1 unit cav if you can. If you don't use your general's bodyguard, that is. However, that then moves me on to talk about your city itself. It's actually really bare bones. A lot of the settlements that you begin with in the campaign often will have you with a population surplus, so you can usually get a upgrading your city to get at least 1 more building slot. Or if you don't have it already, it's generally not far away. But for whatever reason, this settlement here, Geros, only has 2 building slots that are already taken up, and you don't have any population surplus coming anytime soon, which is kind of interesting. And as such, your economy is going to be very, very bare bones in the early game. As you can see, it is winter, but we are only earning 2100 per turn. It will change as time goes on and we get into spring and summer. But yeah, that's still fairly bare bones, and you won't be changing it quickly anytime soon, which is the main issue in my opinion. You have basically an agricultural plot here already. Of course you could dismantle it if you like, but then you run out of food instantly. You're already starting at 0 food, although I believe we should have 1 food. Actually no, not even that. Yeah, I was gonna say winter might be having an effect, but if we hover over it, no, it doesn't even say that it is, so I doubt it is. So that's a problem. You don't have much food at all. Basically, you're starting off as a nomadic tribe in the north with very little to show for it, and the campaign certainly reflects that. So, moving forward, you're a small, fairly small nomadic faction around Scythia on the north side of the Black Sea. What is your political situation? Well, diplomatically, you have no current relations with anybody. You have no wars, no allies, no trade agreements, no military access, even nothing at all. And so as such, you are generally fairly free to figure out what direction you want to expand. Do you want to go south and take out the Bosporan Kingdom? You want to go east and attack the Sarmatian nomads? Do you want to go west and deal with your Scythian brethren and then march on the Celts and the Dacians? It's up to you. However, of course, I have my recommendations, and I'll focus on that in the part 3 edict of this, but I will talk a little bit more about that shortly. However, before we do though, you do have some enemies and some friendly nations. When I say enemies, I mean people who are more inclined to dislike you and will probably declare war on you fairly early on. For example, the Aorsoi, they definitely do not like you. Them and the Sarakis over here will generally be demanding a lot of money from you, and they'll offer you non-aggression, but they will want a lot of money in return for it, so don't trust them. They even have the devious trait behind them and the treacherous trait. Whenever you see those traits, I wouldn't even bother trying to get diplomatic relations. Even though the Aorsoi are a neutral, quote-unquote, faction, I still wouldn't trust them whatsoever. These guys will definitely be hostile towards you in your early campaigns. However, you do have some friendly nations. You have the Bosporan Kingdom, or the Arche-Bosporus. They start off friendly with you, however, they are also quite demanding, but they're very powerful. Just getting out of this for a moment, if we scroll down, you'll see that they own an entire province, literally on your doorstep. The entire province is named after them, Bosporus, the Bosporan Kingdom. They have the capital here, they have a settlement up here that actually has copper available, and then they have wine down here at this other coastal settlement, so they are in a very powerful position. And so even though they're supposedly friendly towards you, they can basically do whatever they want to you, and there's not too much you can do about it. So I would recommend... Actually, no, hold on. I'll wait on my recommendation. There's still a little bit more we need to talk about with diplomacy. In the west, this is where things get a little bit better. You have the Izagis to your west, who are also quite devious. However, they generally will accept trade and non-aggression with you. Even if we check it out here, they're instantly at moderate for both of them. They usually accept it without issue. You might need to pay them a little bit. Oops. But even then, that means that you can secure a good portion of your western flank. However, the Katia Oroi over here, while they're in a similar position, you can get non-aggression with them. I've also had them declare war on me in my test campaigns I've done as a Scythian, so do be careful of them. Again, they are also devious, which means that they won't really hold or care for their alliances, which is going to be a problem for you, because basically at the start of your campaign you need to figure out what direction you want to go, and whatever direction you don't want to move, you need to get non-aggression and alliances. So if you want to come east, then you should be trying to get non-aggression and alliances with these two factions here, or even the Archbosporus. It's up to you. But if you want to march one way, make sure your back is protected. It's just common sense, and any Total War player can probably tell you that, so keep that in mind. And then, of course, outside of these nomadic and the one Greek faction that's immediately bordering you, you will also have a lot of different cultures to interact with. If you go down here through Caucasia into Armenia, you will obviously have Caucasians and Armenians. You'll also have Greeks along the coastline. You'll have Persians down here who will be marching north as well. You will have Greeks down here in Syria. Coming back west, though, you have Dacians over here. And then once you get past them, you have Thracians. And then you go back to Greeks. And keep in mind, all Greek factions will have a morale, basically, edge over your armies, generally speaking. You could probably make up for it by specializing a agent or something in your army, like a champion, or just specializing your generals. But if they have a good general, then it will counteract that. So that is going to be a bit of a problem for you. And then even in the west, you do have some Celtic factions. However, they are usually a little bit more inclined to be peaceful towards you, as they'll be busy fighting amongst themselves, Greeks, and of course the Romans over here in the west. So you have a very interesting position. You are on the edge of the map. There's basically nobody north of you, despite the strategic map here showing a lot more area of play up here. It's not how it is actually. Right here is the limit. You can't go any further north than this. Not too sure why, but that's just how it is. So it is what it is. That's it. But yeah, you are in the northern edge of the map, basically in the center, I would say. So that's quite a good strategical position to be in, because it means that you won't be getting attacked from your north, at least not directly from the north. You might have to deal with these guys, but after that, you should be okay. Moving forward, though, like I said, your economy is going to be very pathetic pretty much throughout the campaign. I mean, once you get to the mid and late game, your empire should be large enough that your taxes are making up for basically your weak starting economy. But you might need to try and specialize some settlements in some provinces to try and give you a little bit extra money, give you just that little bit extra oomph. However, even just looking at these units here, we could see that money might not be as much of a problem, because you have a pathetic upkeep for a lot of these units. 70 coins or income, whatever you want to call it, denarii, for a single horse unit per turn. That's actually really, really good, because these horse units are actually quite fantastic. Not necessarily that they're good quality, but they're very useful. They give you a lot for what little you invest in them, which is fantastic. And the same can be said for pretty much all of your units. Of course, when you get to elites, they're going to be more expensive and such. But look at this Scythian Axeman unit. There's a 55 upkeep. That is incredibly cheap. again, it is a pretty low tier unit, but it's very useful. It has excellent armor piercing, decent charge, melee attack and defense isn't really all that bad. Morale's kind of low, but I mean, this is a useful unit for what it's going to do for you, and you could recruit a bunch of them and it wouldn't have too much impact whatsoever. That's fantastic. So your economy does suck, but you should still be able to field some armies. I would recommend in the early game though that you really try to loot settlements, especially settlements that you can deal with easily once they rebel, or maybe there's like a province that you don't care if it rebels, and maybe you have like a military ally close by. Like say for example, you made an ally out of this faction up here, right? But then you took this settlement down here and it rebelled because you looted it and you didn't have any armies nearby. Your ally would send their army down here to deal with the rebellion for you, if they have an army available. The AI is actually really helpful in helping you deal with any rebellions you get. So that's really, really useful, and I'd recommend you try to use looting of settlements to try and basically give you a little bit of a head start. But you will need to do a lot of micromanagement in basically where you do that and the right timing for it. When you're, say you're invading the Bosporan Kingdom here, which I do recommend you do within your first few turns, you don't want to be looting every single settlement, because that's a really far distance between each of the settlements that you might have to go do deal with a revolt at. And the revolt can happen at each of the 3 settlements once you own them all, because they're all part of one province. It's basically randomly generated what settlement they're going to go and rebel at. So think carefully about where you're going to loot. I don't think it should be so willy-nilly, so carefree. So do be careful. Consider where you are looting. Now we have 2 more quick points to cover for the campaign section. Your main capital here has a fairly small population of only 15,000 people. Furthermore, your population class is fairly divided, and of course your elites are very short and in very limited supply. This won't be a massive deal early on because you won't have access to elites for a little while, but once you do get access to them, you're really going to have to be careful and not so careless with them. As you can see here, we do have a fairly steady increase in your elites, so at least your second tier class of elites getting plus 66 for your Eldari elite units, elite subclass. However, the most elite is still increasing only at plus 15. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that word starting with U, but anyway, basically your population is definitely struggling. You are a fairly small nomadic group despite you having the capital region in the province. That is definitely going to be evident to you. However, you do have access to units that are of the low population classes at the start. So while you're using these units such as axemen, generic horsemen, archers, all of that, you won't have any issues. But once you start getting to elites, that's when you have to be really careful and really think about what you want to invest your money into. However, as we'll see shortly, you don't have all that many choices in what you want to use militarily. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. But then my final point is that from the very beginning of the campaign, you can see, like I said before, you're on the edge of the map. And as such, you're not really surrounded by all that many enemies. Your biggest rival right now is the Greeks here, the Bosporan Kingdom. But if you can deal with the Greeks, which your armies should be pretty specifically tailored to defeat, hoplite armies are not going to do very well against a horse army whatsoever, as long as you can get them out of their cities and fight you in the field of battle. Try and bait out their garrisons and all that. But once you deal with the Bosporan Kingdom, the campaign's really just up for grabs. I mean, you're just surrounded by other nomads, so you can easily out micromanage the AI. To your west, gosh, I can't talk right now. To your west, you'll be facing off against barbarians who will be pretty lightly armored, so again, they won't do very well against your armies. And then, even then, once you defeat all of those basically lower tier armies from those different cultures, and you start fighting Greeks, even then, your armies are tailored to defeating Greeks. Heavy infantry won't be able to chase down your horse archers and whatnot. So it all basically comes down to micromanagement, which will be very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section of the video. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the part 2 section of this video, where we'll talk about the military of the Royal Scythians. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the part 2 section of this video where we're checking out the Royal Scythian military. Now, you will note that we're actually not even looking at the naval page for the Royal Scythians, and that's because it's basically not worth mentioning. You have a total of 3 ships, including your Admiral unit. Basically, the bottom line is, if you're playing as the Royal Scythians, do your best to not use a navy, or if you do, just hire mercenaries. But to be honest, it's not even worth looking at just how few options they have as a navy, so I'm not even going to bother covering it. Just bottom line is, try not to use them, or if you do have to, use the mercenary naval units you can get from Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. But anyway, getting started with the land units of the Royal Scythians. Here we are with your General's Bodyguard unit, or at least one of several you get to choose from, but this is the specifically tailored bodyguard unit, so I thought I'd use this one. As you can see, you are a very heavy shock cav unit with a archery component to you. Oh, by the way, I'm also using a completely new reshade for this video and future videos. I'll also be showcasing it in my new campaign that I'll be starting very, very soon. So, as always, please do leave any feedback you have. I tried to make this reshade a little bit more colorful and less dark. I know it was quite dark for some people depending on what monitor or what device they were watching on before, so hopefully this will still be dark enough so that it adds a nice bit of contrast to the armor and such, but not so much that it impedes your viewership. So please do let me know. This is entirely custom reshade now, so I'll be adjusting this as needed when we continue moving forward. But anyway, I'm really loving it so far, so hopefully you guys are too. But again, this is your bodyguard unit that you'll generally be using. Not really too much to say about its stats other than pretty much across the board they're really, really good. You have a very good charge bonus of 63. You have excellent armor at 49. Your speed is at 6, so that's not too bad at all. Missile damage is at 18 as well. It's a very good damage that you want for your archery units. So that's definitely excellent. You have a pretty solid range of 170. Which is higher than your other horse archer units. We'll just have a quick look. Yeah, so extremely useful bodyguard unit. Try to use it as much as you can in the early game once you get access to it. So yeah, just fantastic unit all around. And one thing I'll say now, so I won't have to keep repeating, is that almost all of your core units are resistant to cold, and some of them are entirely immune to snow attrition. So that would be very helpful for you when you're marching through the vast snowy wastelands of the north. So anyway, as you can see, we don't have too many other options. So we'll first start off with your infantry, then we'll move on to the cavalry. And of course, we'll be starting off with your skirmishers.
We will pierce their hearts!
Over here, we have a super basic Scythian foot archer unit. Basically a levy archer. Not too much to say about this guy. Well, this unit, except they have a really cool officer. I believe this is one of the new ones with his new helmet. Looking super nice. A lot of variety in the colors and the looks of the men. But beyond that, strategically there isn't too much to report, and they don't even have a high melee attack or anything like that. But they actually do have a fairly decent armor piercing damage of 12. So that does hint that they use axes of some kind, but on the side I only see that they have knives. That's interesting. It might just be a cosmetic thing. But either way, they have decent armor penetration at 12, but their melee attack is pathetic, as is their defense. So don't even let these guys get into a melee. They will die super quick.
We'll kill them all!
Moving on, you have a bottom tier levy skirmish unit, which is basically in the same position, except they have almost no armor piercing damage. So really definitely don't get these guys into a melee fight. They're not going to be useful whatsoever. The only possible use they could have out of melee fighting is that they would deal some morale damage to whoever they're recharging, but that's it. Beyond that, nothing else to say about them. They're just a basic skirmisher levy unit, pretty much. Try not to use them if you can avoid it, but it is your only skirmish unit besides cavalry. So keep that in mind. If you do want to use skirmishers, that's it. It's all you get. However,
Step archers!
we then move on to the Scythian armored archers. They are super useful. I believe they even made our top 5 best archers in Divided into Impera. I did that video quite a while ago now, but I'm pretty sure we checked out these guys. I remember considering them. I'm not sure if they made the top 5. If not, they were very close, but I believe they did. Either way, the bottom line is that they're a fantastic unit. Missile damage of 18, rage 185, shots per minute of 6, ammunition of 15, which is standard for most archers, which is good. Melee attack and defense is only at 7, which is kind of low considering they're quite elite, but it's not the end of the world. AP damage is at 18, which is quite good indeed. Charge bonus 26, and they have a weapon damage of 18, sorry, and a melee armor piercing damage of 13. So keep that in mind. And then they also have their armor of 25, which is definitely nothing to scoff at, and they have shields on their backs, which will be helpful if they're getting shot in the back. However, I'm skeptical about how useful the shields are on the back. I've heard they're extremely useful, but I mean, if they have to hit the shield, how often are your archers facing away from the enemy? For me, it's almost never. And by the time they're running away from the battle's lost anyway, so it doesn't matter. So I'd have to do some testing to see just how useful they are. But anyway, that's your skirmisher department. Excellent elite tier archer, but the rest of your skirmishers are basically non-existent. Almost not even worth mentioning.
Warriors.
You have some Scythian axemen here in your melee department. They are basically what they are. I mean, they are what it says. They're just Scythian axemen, that's all they are. They have a melee armor piercing damage of 13, which is pretty good. Weapon damage of 18. So they do have some high damage if they manage to make contact with the enemy. But it's really going to just get trounced by a lot of mid-tier stuff. So this is basically one of the units you'll be using to swarm enemy positions, because it's a low-tier costing unit. Doesn't cost much at all. Doesn't cost much manpower. What manpower does draw from is one of your classes that has quite a lot of population at the beginning. So yeah, that's pretty much all it to say about them. However, this is the new unit added in the latest update for the Royal Scythian specifically, and it is the Scythian medium axeman unit. Quite a solid unit all around. They have a really high charge bonus of 29. Most cavalry start off with a minimum of 32 as their charge bonus, so 29 for an infantry unit is not bad whatsoever. Weapon damage and armor piercing of 19 for the weapon, armor piercing of 14, so if they do make contact with the enemy, they'll at least do 14 damage to it. Pretty solid overall. That's actually quite good, especially considering this is just a mid-tier unit. And they have a bonus versus elephants, which is interesting, and an armor of 20. And then they also have a melee defense of 10 and attack of 9. So they're a really solid mid-tier unit for you. However, that's as high as their melee units get. So even though it's technically a mid-tier unit and it does its mid-tier role really, really well, you have no elite infantry whatsoever. Besides your archer unit, which is arguably elite. I would say it is elite actually. But for melee, you got nothing in the elite department. You'll be relying on AOR units and mercenaries basically. But yeah, fantastic new unit. Looks amazing. Massive shout out to the DI team for this. Looks awesome. I really am looking forward to seeing more units like it that come in. They have a solid purpose in the roster, but they also look fantastic. So hopefully we'll see more of that. Moving on though to your spear section. You have a hoplite unit here. This is your Scythian chosen spearmen. Even though it just says that they're spearmen, they actually do have the shield wall ability.
Shield wall now!
This is different to being in a phalanx, but not too much different. The shield wall and the phalanx ability are actually quite similar. So it's definitely going to be a very good holding unit for you. It still can move while it's in the shield wall, I believe, but it's going to move just extremely slowly. But they have great armor, great shields. They have 200 men per unit, very well disciplined. They have a base morale of 49, which is very, very good for an infantry unit. Just a solid unit.
For blood and battle!
Very, very impressive. Massive melee defense of 22. That's extreme.
As you say!
They will really be... oh wait, no. They get to 22 when you have the shield wall ability. Sorry. Melee defense of 21 as your base stat. That's still fantastic. That's really, really good. They will really hold the line for you for quite a while. And they have an excellent bonus versus cav and elephants. So if you can field a good chunk of these units, try to use them to be basically an anvil for your shock cavalry to smash against in the backs of the enemy. So super useful unit. Try to get them as much as you can. They will be excellent at holding the line for you, and they'll even do a fair bit of damage in doing so. Now moving on to your last melee unit to discuss is your Scythian Spearman unit. Very basic Spearman unit. I would basically call this a levy unit, or slightly above a levy unit, but yeah. Nothing really to say about them except they have a pretty solid melee defense, so if you just want to use basically some cannon fodder that will hold the line for at least a little bit, for a few minutes, due to their high melee defense, use these guys, but they have no armor, so they'll die instantly to any kind of skirmisher fire. Although some projectiles will struggle if they're trying to hit them from the front, due to their shields being quite large, but even then, just being at a slight angle, like for example if your archers are shooting from the left side where they're more exposed, yeah, these guys are just gonna get annihilated. So yeah, that's your melee department. That's all of your infantry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units in total, which is actually a lot worse than what it sounds, because only 4 of those are melee units. So yeah, that's your infantry department. But now we will move on to the bread and butter of the Royal Scythians, which is of course horse archers.
Missile-armed riders!
This is your most basic, not even mid-tier, this will be a low-tier unit for you. It's your Scythian light horsemen. Fairly okay stats, nothing really to jump at, except they have a speed of 8, which is very, very high indeed. Again, they are resistant to cold, they have Parthian shot ability, which most of your horse archer units will, which allows them to fire in multiple directions. They can fire while moving, so you can basically have them run away from the enemy, and they'll actually do what horse archers are supposed to do, which is shoot while they're on horseback running away. Basically a very, very useful unit for you in the early game. However, they have almost no armor, an armor of 4, which is pathetic, so be careful with these units. If they get hit by missile fire, they'll die basically instantly, and this is one of the few units in Rome 2 that actually has a mixture of genders. You have a lot of female warriors here. Look at her, wow, she looks great. That's an awesome texture on her face. What a beast. You get him, girl. This will probably be your most used horse unit until the late game, because it's available to you in massive quantities and it's very, very cheap. So use those as much as you can.
Horse archers!
We'll move on to one of your general's bodyguard units, which is the Scythian noble horse archers. Basically, they are what they say they are. They're noble horse archers, and whenever you see the word noble in a unit, it's either going to be extremely well trained and armored, or they're going to be extremely well trained, but they'll have super low tier armor, but that's because they'll have insane damage, which is usually infantry units from the barbarian factions. This, of course, is the former option. They are extremely armored at 51. They have an armor piercing damage at 12, weapon damage at 20, missile damage at 17, which is by using their bows, so they have a range of 160, ammunition of 15, just all across the board. Their stats are really, really promising. They are, by all definition, a noble horse archer unit, and they'll be extremely useful to you in dealing damage from a distance, but also coming in on their charge. Their charge bonus is lower at 40, but they'll still be quite useful to you, and due to their solid melee attack, they'll still do fairly well in a melee with other horse archers or other units that aren't specialized in dealing with cav. But generally speaking, though, the Royal Scythians actually really struggle in the melee cav department, so you'll have to use hybrid units like this to make up for that.
The gods guide our shots!
Next, though, we have your Scytho-Sarmatian horse archer units. Horse archer unit. It's pretty solid unit. Oh, here it is. Okay. Pretty solid unit indeed. It's definitely a step up from your low tier horse archer unit. Great missile damage at 17 for a horse archer. Range of 160, which is pretty decent. Basically, the majority of your stats are a step up from your low tier horse archer unit. But the main thing to note about them is that they actually have a pretty solid charge bonus at 54. So these guys are not just horse archers, they are also basically light shot cavalry. So use them as such. Deal a lot of damage against the enemy, and then when you have a chance, rear charge them as much as you can. and they'll do very well. But again, they have fairly low armor. It's not too bad. It's an armor of 23, but they don't have any shields at all, so they will suffer against skirmisher fire, as will most of your horse archers. But yeah, pretty solid, basically low to mid tier unit for you. I'd probably even call that, yeah, that would be definitely a mid tier cav unit for you.
Royal archers!
Moving back up though in the food chain, we go to Scythian heavy horse archers. Despite them being heavy horse archers, they're actually one of the worst archers specific horse units we've seen yet, because their missile damage is only at 16, the range is at 150. The rest of the stats are all the same, shots per minute 7, ammo 15. But yeah, that kind of makes me question what their purpose is for. I mean, they have a pretty solid armor of 28, but comparing that to your last horse archer unit, which is 23, which is a better horse archer unit, it's, I don't know, it's one of those things where I would be kind of questioning which one I want to use, because you could use this unit, which will undoubtedly be cheaper, and it only has a few stats that are slightly lower.
Royal horse archers!
This unit basically has a little bit more armor, a little bit more morale, and a little bit more speed, but it has worse archery statistics. So if you're really focusing on the archery side of things, you might not even want to use these guys. But again, another just really awesome looking unit. Like, look at that, fire out. That reminds me of the armor you see in the Empire Divided campaign, I think it is, where you have the 3 massive Roman factions going up against each other, and it looks like the Emperor Aurelian, I believe it is, who leads the core Roman faction. Oops. And he has a big golden mask. That armor, that almost tells me like a Roman emperor. Almost. But it doesn't matter. It looks really, really awesome. Very well done, as are the rest of the men in the unit. Moving forward though,
Step, noble lancers!
we come to your Scytho, I'm going to say, Scytho Sarmatian Lancers. Very heavy Lancer charging unit, but they are also a horse arch unit at the same time, with a missile damage of 17, range of 160. They do have a slower shots per minute at just 5, so that's the lowest we've seen out of any of your units yet. But they are also very heavy at 47. They have a good charge bonus at 56, solid weapon damage, but they have pretty low armor penetration damage. So do keep that in mind. They might not be the best at charging into Roman legions, but then they have a melee attack of 13 and a defense of 11. So these guys will also serve somewhat as a melee cavalry option for you, but they will get beaten out by high tier melee caps. So I would try to not use them if you can recruit some AOR or mercenary melee cav that are specifically melee cav. But these guys, they're fairly versatile. They'll shoot the enemy from range, they'll charge in and do some solid damage against non-armored units, and they'll even do good damage against armored units. Armor penetration isn't exactly the be-all and end-all of killing armored units. And then they can also engage enemy cavalry and do fairly well in an extended melee engagement. And they even have a shield here on their arm. It's not a massive shield by any means, but it definitely will help them out a little bit. I'm guessing that's why they actually have a melee defense of 11. Yeah, shield value of 6. Really? Wow. Just for that little thing? Okay. Okay. We'll take that. Sure, why not? But yeah, quite a versatile unit. Most of these units are fairly versatile, but I would say that's definitely one of the more versatile units. But that's it for your horse skirmishers, or horse, what would you call it? Yeah, I would say horse skirmisher division. But moving forward now, we get into the horse melee side of things, which also includes shot cav, obviously.
Heavy horsemen!
Here we have your Scythian armored lancers. Very solid lancer unit. However, they don't have as much armor as some of your other units, but they're still really, really good in the armor department at 49. Melee attack at 15, charge bonus at 59, weapon damage at 31. Again, no armor penetration though, which is interesting. And they do have a bit of an issue here where... Oh wait, no, they don't have an issue. I was going to say that they have an ammunition of 15, but no actual range unit. I mean, no ranged equivalent. It's just not showing us the range stats. But I'm guessing that's because they are a skirmisher unit. They're not a horse archer. They just use javelins when they're fighting. But ammunition of 15? I wonder if that's correct. I'm kind of doubting it is, but because they have the blue line down here, though, it does mean that they do have ammunition. So, very solid shock cavalry unit. They do have a bonus versus infantry, but again, I would try to use these as a option for dealing with enemy cavalry if you can indeed catch them and engage them. But they do have a speed of 6, so a lot of the eastern cav will be able to outrun you. Okay, and then we move on to the Scythian young horsemen. They're basically the lowest of your low when it comes to melee horses. I keep trying to say horse archers, but they're not a horse archer unit. They're basically just a very low tier scout unit for you. They'll be there to chase down enemy skirmishers and then hold other cavalry in position while your other cav units come in and get rear charges or kill them with bows and arrows or javelins. So not really too much to say at all from this unit, except they are very fast and they actually have the stalking ability, which means that they can move while hidden in any kind of terrain. So they should almost always be hidden on the battlefield. Not incredibly helpful in campaigns against the AI, but they will be very helpful for you in head-to-head campaigns or multiplayer battles and such, if you do participate in those. Very cool ability to see added to cavalry. You almost never see it added to cav. It's usually just specific guerrilla-style infantry units, so it's super cool. Moving forward though to our last unit to discuss,
Step Lancers!
Scythian Noble Cavalry. Now this is your best of the best when it comes to shock cavalry. As you can see, they are incredibly well armored. The men are armored head to toe. The horses are all armored almost entirely as well. Charge bonus of 63. That's getting into league with the elite Parthian shock cav. They do still outclass you though. Even though you have such a good unit like this, they will outclass you in the shock department. But you still can give them a good run for their money. This unit also has a solid armor piercing damage of 12. Weapon damage is only at 19. You'd think it might be a bit higher, but it's still not too terrible. Armor is at 51, base morale 49. Speed is at a low 6 though, so they might struggle to chase down faster units, but they will chase down most infantry relatively easily. And nothing else really to highlight about their abilities. They're pretty much the same as all the others, except when you get to this kind of heavy horse unit, the stamina generally is going to be poor. So you don't want to just constantly run them. You will need to rest them if you want to get the most bang for your buck, which you will, because they will be quite expensive, and they will come from your most elite tier of population class, which is not good because you struggle to fulfill that population, or at least fill it up outside of conquering other settlements. But anyway, besides that, that's your solid best shock unit that you get.
Step Noble Lancers!
Before we get into the part 3 verdict though, I will mention the reforms for the Royal Scythians. Some of you guys might have been expecting me to say this already, but I thought I'd mention it now. They do have a special unique reform for them to start receiving better units, and the reforms are that they can be triggered in one of 2 different ways. Now the first way is that they can own a region for 100 turns of another Scythian or Sarmatian faction, basically of another nomadic faction that's next to them. If you own one of those settlements or parts of the region, then and you have it for 100 turns, then you will have the reform trigger. The second way though is that after 70 turns and 10 battles against another Scythian or Sarmatian faction, you'll get the reform triggering, where basically your Scythians and Sarmatian cultures are starting to mix, and as such you're now starting to get a mixture of the cultures in your military roster. But beyond that, that's it for your reforms. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the part 2 section of this video. Now we'll get on into the part 3 verdict of the Royal Scythians. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the part 3 section of this video, where we talk about the verdict of the faction being the Royal Scythians. So I only have a few points to make for this verdict. It's going to be another short verdict. I've been trying to make these videos as short as possible, but in doing so I somehow make them longer. But anyway, let's get into it. My first major point is that your early game will be actually very, very rough, in my opinion. You have a lot of factions around you that will not like you and will probably declare war on you. Your western flank should be okay, especially if you be fairly diplomatic in how you play and you manage your relations appropriately. But your east is going to be fairly aggressive towards you, which is not good because it kind of combines into my second point, is that you need to deal with the Bosporan Kingdom within the first 20 to 30 turns. They need to be your main rival. You need to kick them out, take their ports, take their resources that they have, and start getting some trade flowing into your kingdom. So that will be quite tough. You need to blitzkrieg the Greeks, kick them out of your northern Black Sea holdings. Once you do that, then you'll be in a very dominating position. But until you do that, though, your early game is going to be very rough. You're not going to have a lot of money. And like I said, you will have some aggression coming in from the east. But you do have a lot of territory in between you and the enemy settlements. So you might have a fair bit of warning before the enemy factions actually reach you. So that will be handy. But yeah, like I said, generally speaking, your early game will be quite rough, especially on the diplomacy side of things. You could see yourself getting involved in multiple battles or wars at once. Since you're just a small little faction, other factions will pretty easily gang up on you. Moving on to the next point, obviously your military is lacking in variety. You have a massive amount of cavalry, but even then your cavalry is fairly limited in that you only have shock and archer units. You don't really have too many melee options, and while you can use your shock cav for melee purposes, you still will get outclassed by specialized anti-cav cavalry units that will be coming at you, as well as the Furio spears and whatnot of the Greeks and their pikemen and so many other things. So you will be really focusing heavily on trying to do some hammer and anvil charges against the enemy, which means that you will have to rely on your pretty low class infantry units to hold the line, while your horse archers and shock cav gets busy. Thankfully though, your horse archers are very versatile in that a lot of them are shock cav themselves, or even furthermore, some of them can operate as melee horse units, but I wouldn't rely on them. In fact, I wouldn't depend on them if I could avoid it. So bottom line is your military is definitely lacking in diversity. Mercenaries and AOR units will be the way to fix it for you. I know I say that a lot in these faction overviews, but it is by design. Historically, nations that conquered other regions started to use people from that region to serve in their armies, and so it is really reflected here, where you're basically a nomadic people who will need to start to rely on recruiting units and infantry specifically from different regions you conquer. Anatolia will actually be a super big boost to you, as will Greece. They'll give you some very nice armor piercing and heavy infantry units. Very quickly, we'll get down to our last couple of points. I said this before, but I will just reiterate it. Your economy is going to be very rough for quite a while in the early to mid game. Late game, things should be fine as you start to conquer settlements and you start to get income just flowing in based on the amount of tax you're getting. But in the early game, you're really going to have to take out the Bosporan Kingdom as quickly as you can. I can't stress it enough. You really need to get that trade with their resources flowing. I wouldn't bother allying with them or using them as trade. Just take them out as quickly as you can, and then focus on dealing with the Scythians and Sarmatians to your east, who will be hostile towards you. So yeah, definitely just try and take their resources and use them for your own good. You don't have many other resources around you that help your economy boost early on. So once you take the Bosporan Kingdom's territory, that's going to be your core economical hub until you really start expanding down to Armenia or west down into Thrace and Greece. So keep that in mind. Your economy is going to be rough, but you do have a lot of cheap units at your disposal. And then moving on to our final point before we get to the difficulty level. This is a super heavy micromanagement faction. And I don't just mean that on the battlefield where you need to micromanage your rear charges constantly, micromanage your light archers, light horse archers I should say, getting caught by enemy archers. There's so many different things on the battlefield you need to micromanage, but also in the campaign you need to micromanage things fairly heavily, at least for the early part of the campaign. Once you get to the mid tier and you've taken over Bosporan and all that, that's when things will be fairly chill for you and you can start invading east or west at your own whim. But early on, you really need to time your invasion of the Bosporan Kingdom right. Often in my campaigns, They will end up marching east, and they will end up fighting against the other nomadic factions. I would recommend you wait a few turns before you attack them while they go and do that, so their armies are not near their cities. But once you deal with that, like I said, once you take out the Bosporan Kingdom, you're going to have a pretty solid campaign. There won't be too many threats that will come up against you that will be all that dramatic. And so now we'll move on to the final part of this video, which is talking about the difficulty of the faction. Now, in my opinion, the Royal Scythians are a fairly solid 6 out of 10 above average difficulty rating. They're not hard in my opinion, but they're definitely not average. You will have to do a fair bit of micromanagement, but once you get through that first stage of the campaign, the rest of the campaign should be pretty much a doddle for you. It should be fairly easy. Even though your military is really limited to just cavalry, about half the factions in the game rely on infantry, which is basically the perfect counter, perfectly countered, I should say, by your horse archers and your shock cavalry. So while you will have to do a lot of micromanagement on the battlefield in the campaign, once you get it done with the Bosporans, you'll have a fairly easy time. I think you can basically decide on what direction you want to go. You're not going to have any major arrivals until things start getting really hard around turn 100 or so, where you're starting to get into the late mid campaign. And the Parthians are far away, the Seleucids are far away. There's no one close to you that is going to be a juggernaut faction early on. The nomads can be a juggernaut faction, but you're one of the best nomadic factions there are, so you should be the juggernaut in the region with no rival nearby. So yeah, basically you get to decide how you want to play. You want to go west, get Greece and Thracia and all of that, or you want to go east, take on the Parthians and the Seleucids and the Egyptians even, who knows. It's up to you, and you get to decide when you want to start invading, which is a pretty rare thing to be able to decide in Rome too. Generally speaking, you go from one war to the next, but like I said, take out the Bosporan Kingdom, take out the aggressive nomads, and then you will have a fair bit of leeway in what direction you want to go and how to respond to threats as well. Of course, you'll have enemy nations declaring war on you, but because you have so much landmass in between your core settlements and theirs, you'll have a fair bit of reactionary time available to you to divert armies, change your armies up to fit the composition you need, and deal with them appropriately. Your only real drawback will be that you won't be able to do much against naval invasions, but because you're in the very north of the Black Sea, you won't be really getting all that many. Rome isn't going to send a fleet all the way up there until like turn 300 or something ridiculous where it won't even matter. The Greeks might send a fleet up your way. I've seen Macedon send fleets along to attack Thracian towns, but that's it. I've never seen them go further north, and while they still might, then you just use their archers in your port cities to dismantle their troops as they land on your shores. Fairly easy defense there, especially if you get the elite tier archers. So that's pretty much it, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I have to say about the Royal Scythians. They received a lot of special treatment in the latest update, and their new looking units show the better for it. They're definitely looking fantastic. The new mid-tier Axeman unit gives them a little bit more oomph to their infantry, which they're desperately in need of. However, I think they're a fairly well balanced faction now. I don't see them needing many more units at all. They can start to rely on AOR merc units like nations like this should, because they're a nomadic people and not really designed to do infantry warfare. And so your military reflects that perfectly. They're in an excellent campaign position, being on the northern edge of the map, near no other major powers. They're just in a fairly interesting position, and I would recommend it to anyone who is fairly new to playing as a cavalry-heavy faction, because like I said, you have the Greeks to yourself, who will be excellent for you to take on, because they'll be using a lot of heavy infantry, and then you'll be fighting against other nomadic factions who shouldn't, in theory, be able to micromanage as well as you. At least hopefully they shouldn't, but who knows, maybe you slip it on one day, that's okay. But yeah, bottom line is, fairly safe spot. It's a good faction, they look fantastic, and I recommend you check them out if you're interested in using a horse-heavy nation. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Again, please do let me know your thoughts on the new reshade I'm using. If you like it a bit darker, a bit more lighter, not as much color, less color, whatever, I could always adjust it based on feedback. So please do leave your feedback down below. Leave your suggestions for the next faction you would like to see overviewed. But until then, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.